quick disclaimer before the video begins. I make no claim of ownership of any of the pictures used. Everything in the video has been compiled from various sources on the internet, and there is no intentional hate to anyone involved. In today's video, we're going to discuss the case and mysterious death of actor George Reeves. George Kiefer Brewer was born on January 5, 1914 in Woolstock, Iowa. His parents were called Donald Carl Brewer and Helen Lesher. They were married 5 months before George was born. Many people of the time, when they had children out of wedlock, would lie to their kids about when their real birthday was. This was no different in the case of George. George did not learn of his real birthday until he became an adult, and to make that even more confusing, when he died, his mom had his urn engraved as January 6, 1914 instead of January 5th. Donald would eventually leave the family, and by 1920, Helen had moved to Pasadena, California with George in order to live with her sister. When living there, she met her new husband, Frank Joseph Bisolo, who would later go on to adopt George in 1927, changing his name to George Bisolo. The marriage between Helen and Frank lasted 15 years before they eventually divorced and separated while George was away visiting relatives. When George came home, his mother had told him his stepdad had taken his life, and he did not know he was still alive until well into his movie career. Frank would later go on to die on March 4th, 1944, at the age of 51. When George had entered high school, he began singing and acting in school plays, and after graduating high school, he would later go on to study at the Pasadena Junior College, and eventually moving on to the Pasadena Playhouse. While attending the Pasadena Junior College, he would meet his future wife, Eleanor Needles. The couple would later get married on September 22, 1940. In 1939, he would go on to make his first on-screen credited appearance as one of Scarlett O'Hara's twin suitors, Stuart Tarleton, in Gone with the Wind. He was incorrectly credited as Brent Tarleton, who was played by Fred Crane. Both actors dyed their hair red for the roles, and the production of Gone with the Wind had taken so long that it was his technical 5th on-screen credit. After filming for Gone with the Wind had been complete, George would go back to the Pasadena Playhouse and get cast in the lead role for the play Poncho. This role would lead to him getting a contract with the Warner Brothers and having his professional name changed to George Reeves. His name credit was then changed accordingly in Gone with the Wind. In the year 1940, he would appear in Tear Gas Squad, Calling All Husbands, and in 1941, he would be in Man at Large. In 1943, George would go on to play his first starring role as Lieutenant John Summers in So Proudly We Hail. His character would fall in love with Claudette Colbert's character. Shortly after the release of So Proudly We Hail, Reeves had put his career on hold to enlist in the Army. He would join the Special Theatrical Unit in the U.S. Army Corps, and he would appear in several training films, including a movie on the dangers of the venereal disease. He was stationed in New York. The theater director had cast Reeves in a small role in this play called Winged Victory, and after the show's run on Broadway, he would tour with the company. At the end of the war in 1946, Reeves would return to California, and over the next few years he would appear in lots of low-budget films, one of them being Jungle Goddess, the other Thunder in the Pines, both released in 1948. His opportunities in film were beginning to dwindle, so he would pursue mainly television roles. In the year 1950, George and Eleanor would divorce. In the year after, he would reluctantly accept his now famous role of Superman. He took over the role at the age of 37 from famous cowboy actor Kirk Allen. He made his official debut as Superman in the year 1951 in Superman and the Mole Man. In the fall of 1952, Superman premiered to high ratings and equal impressive critical acclaim. The popularity of the characters of Superman and mild-mannered Clark Kent gained Reeves' popularity to where he became a household name with young viewers. Although with higher popularity in the show, Reeves had become more and more dissatisfied with the direction of his career that was to come. Before we get to the rest of George Reeves' career, we're going to talk about the behind-the-scenes of the Superman TV show. The initial low budget of the show would cause the Superman show to be shot in black and white. Due to shooting television in black and white, costumes had to be different colors to premiere on screen better. The first Superman costume was actually gray, brown, and yellow, which stood out on black and white television. And when George realized that, when in his Superman costume, he said he looked like a damn fool. In shooting flying sequences, George used to be strapped into a harness with wires off the ground. And due to a miscalculation behind the scenes of the wire and it snapping, it led to him falling to the floor. And after that, he refused to shoot scenes on wires. In flying scenes where he would swing in from the window, there was a bar off-screen where George would hop on and swing in scene, and sometimes they could just keep shooting immediately after instead of pausing the take to check if he was hurt. While filming for the role of Superman, George would go on to appear many times at events for children. George would occasionally do events for children as Superman, and there was one such event where it could have gone a lot worse than it did, but still very traumatizing. What we'll see in a minute is a young fan represented in a character in this movie about George called Hollywoodland. The real-life little boy would steal his father's gun that he had as a soldier in World War I or II. Sources say different things. And he wanted to shoot Superman with it to see the bullet bounce off of him. He wound up talking the boy out of shooting him by telling him if the bullet bounced off of Superman, it could possibly hit other people and hurt them. We wouldn't want that. And I think the guilt ate that boy alive, and he would end up handing over the gun to George. You'll be able to find a portrayal of what went down at the event in the movie Hollywoodland. George is played to almost perfection by Ben Affleck in this scene. He really captures the fear that you would feel watching this happen. In 1953, George was given a chance to rejuvenate his lagging film career with a substantial role in the film From Here to Eternity. His hopes to grow his film career were crushed during the preview audience when one of them laughed and yelled, "Hey, there's Superman," when he came on screen. During the final release of the film, he had only appeared momentarily and didn't receive screen credit. The typecasting brought his career to a halt, and From Here to Eternity had marked his last major motion picture before his death. Even though he did not enjoy being typecast as the heroic Superman, he took his status as a role model to children very seriously. When doing events for children for additional income, he would avoid smoking where kids could see him, and he eventually kicked the habit completely. With his professional problems along came his private problems. Reeves had been in a long-term affair with common-law married Toni Mannix. She was with Eddie Mannix for years before that. Tony was having an affair of his own, but all four of them would travel together on vacations and act as couples to each other. Eventually, Reeves broke it off and started dating a New York socialite called Lenore Lemon. Tony would become enraged at the breakup, and she would begin harassing them and stalking them to the point to where Reeves would have to file a restraining order. George and Lenore would eventually get engaged and planned to be married June 19th, 1959, but George would die June 16th. The contract for the Superman TV show was so unfair that they only had to give them a 4-week notification on whether or not they were going to begin shooting. Funding fell through on many projects he wanted to direct or star in, so he would always have to return to Superman as well. And he was not eager to keep playing it as he was in his 40s, although he was always willing to return as Superman as it paid his bills. George had been hoping to direct a low-budget science fiction film written by a friend of his that was in the Pasadena Playhouse with him, but the funding obviously fell through, so the film was never made. George would be found dead in his bed on June 16th, 1959. His death was ruled a self-inflicted suicide by gunshot, so his hands were not tested for gunshot residue when his autopsy was performed. There are a few things about his crime scene that is very suspicious, making many people think that George did not take his life. There are 3 theories going around as to what actually killed George. The first one being that Tony Mannix called for a hit by Eddie through the Mafia. The second that Lenore shot him. And the third actually being a suicide. One of the first things that makes the crime scene so suspicious is the fact that George was found naked when he was dead. There were 2 gunshots in the floor of his bedroom, yet it was only reported by Lenore and 2 other house guests that they only heard 1. It was supposed that Lenore had been joking about George killing himself the day in a few seconds right before he did it. Some people say this would be a distasteful joke, and others would think this was a confession that she did it. Now with Tony Mannix, as the saying would go, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. George had broken up with her in order to get with Lenore, and she was very heartbroken about it. So it was rumored that she called her husband who had connections with the Mafia. George would have been in a number of mysterious accidents months before he would eventually be found dead. And Tony supposedly confessed to a Catholic priest because she was fearing of going to hell that she had George killed. Many others just say George was suffering from severe depression due to lack of jobs due to being typecast as Superman. His last known acting job was as Superman in an episode of I Love Lucy. His non-Superman role was in Westward Ho! The Wagons for the Walt Disney Company. There was supposedly going to be 1 more season of Superman, and he was looking forward to filming it. And then he was looking forward to finally getting to move on from the project, as he had been playing Superman for 8 years at that point. He had turned 45 that year, so he felt he was getting too old to be Superman. The world lost a great man when he died. Many children would see that their Superman was indeed human and vulnerable just like them. The world lost a great human that day. The Superman curse managed to follow him even to this day, and many actors of the Superman franchise. We might discuss those in a future video. The awfulness of the stereotype of superhero casting followed him into his death, and still follows him with his modern fans today. I sure hope whatever afterlife George believed in, he's happy where he ended up. You are very much remembered today, George, and you are very much a legend. Rip George Reeves, January 5th, 1914 to June 16th, 1959. Your fans still love you dearly.